Well, while people digested the news here, the Chancellor was in the Swiss resort of Davos, where he's been enjoying the annual shindig for the rich and powerful, the World Economic Forum. Our economics editor, Faisal Islam, is there too. Faisal.
Yes, just park today's disappointing minus 0.3% number for a moment and consider this, that in the 27 months or 9 quarters since the Chancellor outlined his deficit reduction plan, since his spending review, that's assumed that the economy would be 6% bigger, it would grow by 6% by now. It has actually grown just 0.5%. We've had a tenth of the growth that they presumed in that deficit reduction plan. And the problem with today's number is that we did have an impressive number last time, and this shows that it just isn't momentum there, that we're back in the doldrums. It opens up some new concerning possibilities. There's a precarious stability in the Eurozone, so the markets are looking for their next victim, and no less a person than George Soros said yesterday, markets are betting against the pound, even though he's retired, perhaps helpfully. My sense is the Treasury is not too hopeful about this quarter either, and there are some fears about that, and the great hope is for the second half of this year. There's a cautious sense of confidence elsewhere, and they're hoping that companies spend their money. But all of this leaves serious questions for the Chancellor. You'll hear from him in a moment, but remember, once he did actually blame a bad GDP figure on the snow, so we're better than the snow to find out what on earth's going on and what can be done.
Stalled again, on its way down, the British economy heading into another reverse. Has the Chancellor run out of excuses? Has he run out of ideas? Or is this underperformance just the new normal? Part of the long, hard slog out of the world's biggest credit bubble. Over the past 3 years, No Growth Britain's economic freeze has been explained away in various ways by the Chancellor.
We had the coldest December for 100 years. Businesses were closed. There was a Eurozone crisis. There is an ongoing Eurozone crisis. For years, we've been building up these problems with all that borrowing. There are very deep-rooted economic problems that Britain has to tackle. Private sector debt, public sector debt.
A drinks party at the Chancellor's Hotel. The British business elite gathering for their annual Davos lunch on this day of economic demise. The message from their supporters, don't blame austerity, blame Europe.
Probably the only economy in Europe that's been very clear on austerity and using the word austerity is the British economy. And look,
They never said it was going to be flat. They said that it would have grown 6% by now.
6?
6% was the projection, and we've had 0.5.
But I think we have a major issue in Europe. This is not just a UK issue. I mean, the German economy contracted more than the British economy in the last quarter. And, our biggest issue and the biggest challenge business faces is how do we get Europe back on track?
How do we get Britain back to strong growth?
Well, to start with, I don't get too excited about quarterly numbers. I think we should look at what the underlying dynamic is.
The underlying thing's pretty flat.
Well, at the moment it is. At the moment it is pretty flat. Look, there isn't a single sort of magic wand that can be waved and suddenly the UK gets back to a rapid pace of growth. But one part of the answer, I think, is to get closer engagement with the fast-growing emerging markets. That's where global GDP growth is.
Those high-growth economies in Asia and here in Switzerland have driven their growth through massive investments in infrastructure. The Deputy Prime Minister, Nick Clegg, said that the near halving of public investment by the coalition was a mistake. British business wants the government to move fast.
What we would like to see is that many of these projects are actually rolling out in order that their companies can actually bid on these jobs and also create jobs with them. And I think so we need to have an acceleration in many of these things in order to stimulate the job creation.
Triple dips are a little tastier in Switzerland. A private dinner at a Davos fondue restaurant for the Chancellor, Prime Minister and Mayor of London was live tweeted to the world last night. Though in truth, £22 for a pizza is bargain basement in this part of the Alps. One of those dinner guests today advised the Chancellor to boost confidence by building more and saying less.
Stuff that will drive jobs and growth now and in the medium term, and also provide the housing that we want. Take the savings from elsewhere in the budget. So I think that the rhetoric of austerity, insofar it was ever useful, has sort of outlived its purpose, and I think that's something that George completely gets.
Yet again, the Chancellor had to try to explain grim economic numbers today, and it won't be the last time.
So 4 areas of concern for the Chancellor. It looks like we are in a triple dip. that might mean that we lose the AAA rating for government bonds. But then key questions from his own side about his own strategy, on rhetoric from the Mayor of London, but also about those key cuts to capital spending from the Deputy Prime Minister. Lots of questions for George Osborne. He's been settling on a narrative that it was always going to be tough, that this is the result of the payback from a giant credit binge. This is the hangover. Here's what he had to say to me earlier today. Chancellor, these figures, do they not show that you've run out of excuses?
Well, it's a reminder that Britain faces a very difficult economic situation. We faced a particularly difficult situation last year. We've got problems at home with the debts built up over many years. We've also got problems abroad with our main export market, the Eurozone, in recession. And we can either run away from those problems or confront them, and I'm absolutely determined we confront those problems, we overcome them.
Growth is the problem now. The growth is the problem now, isn't it? 6 percentage points of growth your original budget promised, and we've had 0.5% in 9 quarters. That's now a trend. That is now a reality. And you're still saying the same thing, where the British public suffering a flat economy.
Well, what are the issues holding the British economy back? We've got our debts and deficit. We've got our plan to deal with that, and the deficit is coming down. We're not as connected as a country as we should be to the Chinas and Indias of this world. We are now exporting more to them. In the end, we've got to create a competitive environment for British businesses to win that global race, to create the jobs of the future. That is happening, but these problems were built up over many years. They are deep-seated, and overcoming them is, of course, a difficult task.
Can you admit you've made some mistakes, like your own Deputy Prime Minister said? You cut investment spending too much at the beginning of your chancellorship.
Well, what Nick Clegg was saying, and I agree with him, is that capital spending is important, and we are actually spending £20 billion more than Labour were going to spend if they had won that election. And we are taking a very deliberate choice, a choice that is controversial, to spend less on welfare payments, something opposed by our political opponents. And
you're spending more on welfare now because the economy's not growing. I mean, the plan was you'd spend less on welfare. Every single metric seems to be going in the wrong way. Maybe the jobs market's okay, but on growth and on spending on welfare...
Look, the deficit has come down by a quarter. We've made real cuts to the welfare budget. Controversial cuts that are fiercely debated in the country, but I think are the right ones, because that's not where our money should be going at the moment. And yes, unemployment. This week, we saw unemployment fall again. Businesses able to hire more people, employment at a record high. So we are making this economy more competitive. But if you're telling me it's taking time, yes, it is, because these problems were many years in the making, and there is no magic solution. And by the way, I think the British people understand that sometimes better than the political classes.
Why not front up the British people and say, actually, this is going to last for a few years longer? This sort of flat growth, basically, that we've got and we've now had for 3 years nearly.
Well, I've said to the British people that this is a hard road, but we're on the right track. We're heading in the right direction. We're dealing with our problems.
So why have you added to the uncertainty with this European referendum? Are you going to campaign for Britain to stay in the European Union? Are you going to vote for Britain to stay in the European Union?
No, I want Britain to stay in a reformed European Union, a European Union which helps this continent create jobs and offer careers to young people, rather than stifle business and competition. I want the European Union to be a solution to our problems, rather than an obstacle to economic prosperity. So that is the campaign we're leading. Of course, we should get the consent of the British people for this. And in the end, why should we be afraid of asking the British people about their future? I'm absolutely clear we're right to ask the British people. And by the way, the business reaction, both at home and indeed abroad, has been much more positive than people expected, because businesses are on the front line of the European bureaucracy, on the front line of institutions that are not delivering for them.
Just lastly, a triple dip is not the record you wanted to make as Chancellor. It looks like it's happening now. You're the triple dip Chancellor.
No, I'm the Chancellor, dealing with the problems I inherited from the last government, but confronting those problems head on. And everything I do is to get the British economy moving forward, creating jobs and overcoming those deep-seated problems built up over many years.
The Chancellor talking to Faisal in Davos earlier.